The fire is already lit. Sit down, breathe, and listen. Carl Jung once wrote, "What we do not face within ourselves, we will encounter as fate." But what if someone else's fate enters through your skin? Some confuse empathy with light, but what few realize is that feeling too much without knowing why can be the beginning of an invisible drowning. In this video, you'll understand why the unconscious empath isn't helping. They're dragging you down. And more, you'll uncover what most people never told you. Not every pain you feel is yours. Do you want to know why you carry the weight of the world even when it didn't ask? Want to understand why you're drawn to the ones who drain you? Then stay. Because in the end, you'll realize that what you've been calling a gift might actually be psychic contamination. And the cost of not knowing the difference is far too high.
He always believed his sensitivity was a gift. He could feel when someone was lying, when someone was hurting, when someone was falling, even in silence. He learned to take pride in it, to be the one who feels for two. But one day, what they called a gift began to make him sick. Unexplained fatigue, mood swings that didn't feel like his, a sudden urge to cry, sudden bursts of anger, until it wasn't sudden anymore. It was someone else's. Only that someone wasn't him. And that's when the question began to form. What exactly am I feeling? Because there's a chasm between feeling what the other feels and realizing where that feeling is coming from. Carl Jung once said, "The unconscious is not only individual, it is collective." And that's where the danger lies. Because empathy, when unconscious, becomes psychic contamination, and the empath, without realizing it, becomes a stage not for healing, but for projection. Culture celebrates the empath as someone spiritually evolved, but no one talks about the other side. The empath who absorbs too much, who dissolves in relationships, who carries pain they don't understand. Imagine a body bleeding from wounds it never lived. Imagine a soul bowing before traumas that were never its own. Imagine someone suffering without ever having lived the story because they were trained to feel before they learned to understand. That's not spirituality. That's porosity without structure. And the more he felt, the more he got lost, because no one ever taught him that empathy is also a boundary. That it's not enough to feel, one must discern. But how can you discern if you've always confused love with absorption? That night, before the fire, an ancient image emerged. A woman standing on a bridge, her eyes absent, her hands outstretched, trembling between the urge to ask for help and the impulse to push away. Beneath her, an abyss full of voices. They cried, pleaded, screamed for something they couldn't even name. The woman couldn't see, but she could feel. She felt each cry as a wound in her own flesh. She felt it as if it were hers, but it wasn't. And that was the real torment, not knowing where the voices ended and where she began. That woman was the unconscious empath. She wasn't healing. She was being contaminated. The symbol is clear. She was an open body, but blind, a vessel for nameless voices. And no one ever taught her that feeling for everyone isn't compassion, it's psychic exposure. Because the unconscious is not ethical. It is vast, symbolic, chaotic. And when the empath opens their doors too wide, it's not just feelings that enter. Shadow enters. Carl Jung warned, "The collective unconscious does not distinguish between self and other." This is the truth few can bear to hear. Empathy, when raw, becomes a channel for possession, not by mythological demons, but by human pain, forgotten desires, traumas floating through the void, waiting for a new body to inhabit. And the empath, when blind, becomes that body. They suffer without knowing they've been invaded by someone else's pain.
Most empaths don't notice the exact moment they cross the line, because that line makes no sound. It gives no warning. Sometimes possession begins with a noble gesture, a shoulder offered, a cry embraced, a silence honored. But little by little, the space between self and other begins to disappear. And without realizing it, the empath becomes the stage where the other's shadow performs. It's not magic. It's not madness. It's psychic dynamics. When someone refuses to feel their own pain, they seek out another. And if the empath is open, available, eager to help, the pain enters. It comes in the form of sudden fatigue, of sadness with no name, of anger that seems to come from nowhere. But it doesn't come from nowhere. It comes from the other. And the empath unknowingly allows it. Carl Jung warned that the unconscious is a hall of mirrors. What we do not face within ourselves, we project onto others. But the unconscious empath doesn't project, he absorbs. And instead of healing the other, he ends up carrying what was never his to bear. This is not empathy. It is emotional incorporation, symbolic fusion, the beginning of losing oneself. She believed that to love was to feel what the other couldn't put into words, that to care was to carry, that being close meant allowing yourself to hurt, silently. And the most dangerous part? She thought all of this was beautiful, almost sacred, as if suffering for someone was an act of love, as if emptying herself was proof of empathy. But here came the revelation. She wasn't helping. She was erasing herself. It wasn't compassion. It was contamination. Carl Jung called this enantiodromia, the moment when something turns into its opposite. The healer becomes the wound. Love becomes imprisonment. Empathy becomes a stage for the shadow. And the cruelest part? Many empaths mistake this pain for purpose. They believe they were made for this, that their role is to suffer with or for those they love. But this isn't a calling. It's an archetypal addiction, a fusion with the pain of others to avoid facing their own. Because deep down, the real question was never, how deeply do you feel for others? But rather, how much do you abandon yourself to avoid losing them? This is the heart of the empath's confusion, mistaking presence for dissolution, love for fusion, help for sacrifice. And in this silent pact, the empath vanishes, slowly, without noise, like someone who loves until there's no one left inside. After so long feeling for everyone, an unexpected question cuts through like a blade. What if you couldn't heal anyone until you healed yourself? Not out of coldness, but out of integrity. And what if this love for saving others was just a sophisticated excuse not to save yourself? No one says this to the empath. No one dares to touch that nerve, because the world applauds those who give, even if they destroy themselves in the process. But Jung taught us what is not confronted within ourselves will be lived out as fate in others. And there are empaths who dive into others as a form of escape. Escape from what? From the self. From their own repressed rage, from their fear of becoming who they truly are. It's easier to feel someone else's pain than to feel your own. It's easier to stay occupied with the other than to sit with your own silence. This is the turning point. The empath who helps too much is not a saint. They are someone who perhaps never learned to ask, what's left of me when I'm not feeling for anyone? Maybe the other's pain is just a veil, a disguised ritual hiding an absence, the absence of self.
There was a man. He dreamed of a temple made of mirrors. He walked through its corridors, expecting to see his own reflection. But with each mirror, a surprise. In one, he saw a crying child. In another, a screaming soldier. In another, a dying woman. None of these images were him, but all of them hurt as if they were. And then he screamed, "Which one of these is me?" But the mirrors gave no answer. They only reflected everything except him. This is the empath in a state of symbolic collapse, a soul made of fragments, pieces of pain that aren't his, or maybe they were, but he could no longer tell. Pieces of life absorbed along the way. And in the midst of so many reflections, what did he become? A compilation of wounds, a mosaic of borrowed memories, a mirror that no longer remembers its own face, the father's rage, the mother's sorrow, the partner's helplessness, the grandmother's guilt. All of it entered, and none of it was named, because no one ever taught him that empathy needs structure, that to feel is not the same as to carry, that to witness is not the same as to bear. Jung said that archetypes are living patterns, forces that take shape within us when we're still vulnerable. And the empath, when he no longer knows where he ends, becomes the perfect stage for these archetypes to act themselves out. The shadow of the martyr, the savior complex, the addiction to being needed, all of it begins to live inside him, and he no longer knows what he feels, because he feels everything.
She wasn't born an empath. She became one. As a child, she learned to listen to the sound of the key in the door to predict her father's mood. She learned to measure her mother's silence, to know if it was a day for hugs or absence. What people now call sensitivity was once a survival strategy. She didn't feel by choice. She felt by necessity. Because if she didn't feel it first, it might hurt more later. Empathy didn't begin as compassion. It began as a radar, as a shield,
as a tactic not to be swallowed by the emotional chaos of adults. Carl Jung stated, "What is repressed by one generation is lived out by the next." And so many empaths carry what the previous generation couldn't express: the grandmother's rage, the mother's sorrow, the grandfather's fear. They are heirs to unspoken pain, emotional sentinels of a system that never named its own ghosts. She learned to anticipate emotions, to regulate the environment, to be useful, to be invisible. And the name they later gave to all of this was gift. But it was trauma. Refined, disguised, functional, but still trauma. She dreamed of a museum. She walked among pale sculptures, faces she recognized, parents, former lovers, friends who had gone. Each statue bore a plaque, "Do not touch, property of the dead." But she touched them, and when she touched them, they bled. This is the necromancer empath, one who doesn't just feel the present, one who connects with pains that should have long been buried, relationships that ended, wounds that were never hers, memories that belong to times that no longer exist. And yet, there she is, touching them, trying to revive them, trying to heal what deep down only needed to be laid to rest. Empathy isn't only about presence. Sometimes it's an unconscious way of staying bound to ghosts. The mother's pain never cried out. The grandfather's guilt buried in silence. The collective trauma of a lineage passed down as inheritance but disguised as purpose. And the empath embraces it all because they feel that letting go would be betrayal, as if love meant continuing to carry the dead on your back. But this is not love. It is emotional necromancy. It is living surrounded by specters. It is avoiding your own pain. For centuries, sensitive figures were mistaken for natural healers. But few ever asked, who heals the healer? Carl Jung wrote that the empath, when not individuated, becomes the vessel of the collective shadow, not by choice, but by lack of boundaries. They feel others because they never learned to inhabit themselves. And when that happens, empathy ceases to be a strength and becomes an archetypal function that pulls one backward. The shadow of the martyr, the savior, the spiritual seducer, all of it can inhabit the empath who has not yet descended into their own depths, who has not yet listened to themselves. In many traditions, the true healer was not the one who felt for others, but the one who had crossed through their own psychic hell. Only after that were they considered worthy of helping, because only then did they understand. To help is not to absorb. It is to remain whole in the presence of what burns in the other. In archetypal psychology, there's a word for this journey: individuation. It's when the empath stops being a sponge and becomes a vessel. It's when sensitivity gains structure. It's when feeling merges with consciousness. Because empathy without consciousness is fusion. Empathy with consciousness is alchemy. The true empath does not dissolve, they remain. And in remaining, they transform. Not because they feel everything, but because they know what they are feeling. And more importantly, they know what does not belong to them. That is the new center. That
is the real fire.
That night, I understood everything. And ever since, whenever the world feels heavy, I return to the fire. Empathy is not about absorbing. It's about holding. It's about feeling without dissolving. Feeling what the other feels without knowing why is not a gift. It's psychic contamination. And the empath without self-awareness becomes a stage for someone else's shadow. But now you know. Now there is a name. Now there is a boundary. You are not here to be an altar for other people's pain. You are here to be a mirror of clarity, a place where pain is witnessed, but not embodied. If something in this spoke to you, carry it gently. Don't turn it into duty. Turn it into reflection. Because the journey of the conscious empath is not to save the world. It's to not abandon yourself in the process of feeling. See you soon.